In the unforgiving streets of New York City, a young boy's act of honesty sets off a chain of events that will unravel decades of secrets, lies, and hidden truths. When 12-year-old Jayden, homeless and struggling to care for his ailing grandmother, returns a lost wallet to its wealthy owner, he never imagines the humiliation and heartbreak that will follow, or the shocking revelations about his own identity that will turn his world upside down. Get ready for a roller coaster of emotions as Jayden navigates a web of family secrets, corporate corruption, and the true meaning of loyalty in this gripping tale of redemption and second chances. In the heart of New York City, where skyscrapers touch the clouds and dreams are born every day, there lived a boy named Jayden. At just 12 years old, he had already experienced more hardship than most adults face in a lifetime. The bustling streets of the Big Apple were his home, and survival was his daily mission. Jayden wasn't alone in his struggle. His grandmother, Lucy, a frail woman in her 70s, was his constant companion and only family. Together, they navigated the harsh realities of homelessness, finding shelter in abandoned buildings and relying on the kindness of strangers to make it through each day. As the sun rose over the city skyline, Jayden stirred from his makeshift bed, a pile of cardboard boxes tucked away in an alley. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes and looked over at Lucy, who was still resting peacefully. A small smile crossed his face as he watched her chest rise and fall with each breath. Despite their circumstances, he was grateful to have her by his side. "Time to get to work," Jayden whispered to himself, careful not to wake his grandmother. He slipped on his worn-out sneakers and pulled a tattered baseball cap over his unruly curls. With one last glance at Lucy, he set out into the awakening city. The streets were already alive with the morning rush. Businessmen and women in crisp suits hurried past, clutching coffee cups and briefcases. Street vendors began setting up their carts, filling the air with the aroma of hot dogs and pretzels. To Jayden, this was all background noise. His focus was on finding food and maybe, if he was lucky, some spare change. As he walked, Jayden's mind wandered to happier times. He remembered the small apartment they once called home, before Lucy lost her job and they couldn't afford rent anymore. He thought about his mother, Sarah, whose face was becoming harder to recall with each passing year. All he had left of her was an old medallion, which he wore around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt. Shaking off the bittersweet memories, Jayden approached his first stop of the day, a bustling deli on Fifth Avenue. The owner, Mr. Goldstein, was one of the few people who showed kindness to Jayden and Lucy. As Jayden peered through the window, Mr. Goldstein caught his eye and gave a subtle nod. A few minutes later, the deli owner emerged with a small bag. "Here you go, kid," he said quietly, handing Jayden the package. "Some sandwiches from yesterday. Still good, just can't sell them." Jayden's eyes lit up. "Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. You're the best." He clutched the bag to his chest, already thinking about how happy Lucy would be to have a proper meal. As he turned to leave, Mr. Goldstein called out, "Hey, Jayden, how's your grandma doing?" Jayden's smile faltered slightly. "She's okay. The cough's getting worse, but she's tough." Mr. Goldstein's brow furrowed with concern. "You take care of her, you hear? And yourself too." With a nod of appreciation, Jayden continued his daily rounds. He knew every nook and cranny of this part of the city, which restaurants were likely to have edible leftovers, which buildings had kind security guards who might look the other way, and which streets were best for panhandling when things got really tough. Despite the hardships, Jayden maintained a resilient spirit. He had an uncanny ability to find joy in the smallest things: a street musician's melody, a puppy wagging its tail, or the way the sun glinted off the glass buildings. This optimism was his armor against the harsh realities of life on the streets. As midday approached, Jayden found himself near a high-end restaurant, the kind of place where a single meal probably cost more than he and Lucy saw in a month. The smell of gourmet food wafted from the kitchen, making his stomach growl despite the sandwiches from Mr. Goldstein. Cautiously, he approached the dumpster in the alley behind the restaurant. Sometimes, if he was lucky, he'd find perfectly good food that had been tossed out simply because it didn't meet the chef's exacting standards. As he rummaged through the trash, careful to avoid anything too messy or spoiled, a glint of leather caught his eye. Reaching in, Jayden pulled out a sleek, expensive-looking wallet. His heart raced as he held it, feeling the weight of opportunity in his hands. With trembling fingers, he opened it to find a stack of crisp $100 bills, more money than he had ever seen in his life. For a moment, Jayden allowed himself to imagine what he could do with this windfall. He could buy warm clothes for Lucy, maybe even take her to a doctor for her cough. They could rent a small room, have a proper bed to sleep in. The possibilities seemed endless. But as quickly as these thoughts came, Jayden pushed them away. He remembered Lucy's words, spoken so often they had become a mantra. Our circumstances don't define us, Jayden. It's our actions that show who we truly are. With a deep breath, Jayden looked inside the wallet for identification. His eyes widened as he read the name on the driver's license, Alexander Rothschild. Even Jayden, with his limited knowledge of the city's elite, knew that name. Rothschild was one of the biggest real estate moguls in New York, his name plastered on buildings all over the city. A plan began to form in Jayden's mind. If he could return this wallet to its rightful owner, surely there would be a reward. Maybe not all the money in the wallet, but enough to help Lucy get the medical attention she desperately needed. As Jayden carefully tucked the wallet into his pocket, a mixture of excitement and anxiety filled him. He knew returning the wallet was the right thing to do, but a part of him couldn't help but worry. What if they accused him of stealing it? What if they called the police? Pushing these fears aside, Jayden made his way back to Lucy. He found her where he had left her, now awake and trying to tidy up their little corner of the alley. "Grandma!" Jayden called out, unable to contain his excitement. "You won't believe what happened." Lucy looked up, her weary face breaking into a warm smile at the sight of her grandson. "What is it, my dear?" As Jayden recounted his discovery and his plan to return the wallet, Lucy listened with a mixture of pride and concern. When he finished, she placed a gentle hand on his cheek. "You have a good heart, Jayden," she said softly, "but be careful. The world isn't always kind to people like us." Jayden nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I know, Grandma, but this could be our chance. Mr. Rothschild is having some big charity event tonight. If I can get in and return the wallet, maybe—" He trailed off, not wanting to voice his hopes too loudly, as if speaking them might make them disappear. Lucy sighed, then nodded. "All right, my brave boy, but promise me you'll be careful." As the day wore on, Jayden couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change. He spent the afternoon planning how he would approach the event, rehearsing what he would say to Mr. Rothschild. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city streets, Jayden prepared to leave for the charity event. He did his best to clean up, using a public restroom to wash his face and comb his hair with his fingers. Before he left, Lucy pressed something into his hand, the old medallion she always wore around her neck. "For luck," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Jayden clutched the medallion tightly, feeling its familiar weight and drawing strength from it. With a deep breath, he stepped out onto the street, ready to face whatever the night might bring. Little did Jayden know that this simple act of honesty was about to set in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever, unraveling secrets long buried and challenging the very foundations of his world. As twilight descended upon New York City, Jayden's heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. The weight of Alexander Rothschild's wallet seemed to grow heavier in his pocket with each step he took towards the glittering high-rise where the charity event was being held. The contrast between his worn, threadbare clothes and the opulent surroundings couldn't have been starker. Jayden paused across the street from the venue, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. Sleek limousines pulled up to the curb, disgorging a parade of New York's elite, men in tailored tuxedos and women draped in sparkling jewels and designer gowns. Paparazzi flashed their cameras, their shouts mingling with the ambient noise of the city. For a moment, doubt crept into Jayden's mind. How could he, a street kid, possibly hope to navigate this world of wealth and privilege? But then he felt the reassuring weight of his grandmother's medallion around his neck, and his resolve strengthened. He had to try for Lucy. Taking a deep breath, Jayden crossed the street and approached the entrance. A burly security guard eyed him suspiciously, moving to block his path. "Whoa there, kid. Where do you think you're going?" the guard asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. Jayden swallowed hard, willing his voice not to shake. I need to see Mr. Rothschild. It's important." The guard's eyebrows shot up. "Yeah, and I need a vacation in the Bahamas." "Beat it, kid." Desperation fueled Jayden's courage. "Please, sir. I found his wallet. I just want to return it." This caught the guard's attention. He studied Jayden for a long moment, then sighed. "Wait here," he said, before speaking quietly into his radio. Minutes that felt like hours passed before a harried-looking woman in a sharp business suit emerged from the building. She introduced herself as Mr. Rothschild's personal assistant and asked to see the wallet. With trembling hands, Jayden produced the leather billfold. The assistant's eyes widened as she examined it, quickly confirming it was indeed her boss's missing property. "Well, I'll be," she muttered, then looked at Jayden with newfound interest. "Come with me, young man. Mr. Rothschild will want to thank you personally." As they entered the building, Jayden was overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding him. Crystal chandeliers hung from soaring ceilings, and the floors were polished to a mirror shine. The elevator they stepped into was larger than the cardboard box he slept in. The assistant led Jayden through a maze of corridors until they reached a private room away from the main event. She knocked on the door, then ushered Jayden inside. Alexander Rothschild cut an imposing figure. Tall and distinguished, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, he exuded an aura of power and authority. He was in conversation with several other well-dressed individuals but turned as Jayden entered. "Mr. Rothschild," the assistant said, "this young man found your wallet and came to return it." Rothschild's eyes narrowed as he took in Jayden's appearance. "Is that so?" he said, his tone neutral. Jayden stepped forward, mustering all his courage. "Yes, sir. I found it behind that fancy restaurant on Fifth Avenue. I didn't take anything from it, I swear." Rothschild took the wallet from his assistant, quickly leafing through its contents. His expression remained unreadable. "Well," he said finally, "it seems everything is in order." He pulled out a crisp $100 bill and held it out to Jayden. "Here's something for your trouble, boy." Jayden's heart sank. $100 was a fortune to him, but he had hoped for more, not for himself, but for Lucy's medical care. Still, he reached for the bill, knowing it would at least buy some medicine for her cough. As Jayden's fingers touched the money, Rothschild suddenly pulled it back. "Wait a moment," he said, his voice taking on a sharp edge. "How do I know you didn't steal this wallet in the first place? It seems awfully convenient that a street urchin like you would just find it." Jayden felt as if he'd been doused in ice water. "No, sir. I didn't steal it, I swear. I found it and wanted to do the right thing." But Rothschild's face had hardened. "Search him," he barked to his assistant. Mortified, Jayden stood still as the assistant patted him down. She pulled out the few meager possessions he had, some loose change, a half-eaten granola bar, and finally Lucy's medallion. Rothschild's eyes locked onto the medallion, and for a split second, something flashed across his face. Recognition? Shock? But it was gone so quickly Jayden thought he must have imagined it. "Well, it seems you're not a thief," Rothschild said coldly. "Just a beggar looking for a handout." Jayden felt tears pricking at his eyes. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. "Please, sir," he said, his voice cracking. "My grandma is sick. I just thought maybe there'd be a reward." Rothschild's laugh was harsh and humorless. "A reward? For doing what any decent person should do. Here's a life lesson for you. Boy, the world doesn't owe you anything." With that, Rothschild turned away, dismissing Jayden as if he were nothing more than an annoying insect. The assistant began to lead Jayden out, her earlier friendliness replaced by cool professionalism. As they reached the door, Rothschild called out, "Wait!" For a moment, Hope flared in Jayden's chest. But when he turned, he saw Rothschild holding out a handful of coins. "Here," the millionaire said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Since you're so eager for a reward." Before Jayden could react, Rothschild tossed the coins onto the floor, the metallic clink echoing in the sudden silence of the room. "Go on, pick them up. That's what your kind does, isn't it?" The humiliation burned through Jayden like fire. He stood frozen, torn between his desperate need for any money at all and the last shreds of his dignity. The other wealthy guests in the room watched the scene unfold, some with discomfort, others with poorly disguised amusement. In that moment, as he stared at the scattered coins on the polished floor, Jayden felt smaller and more alone than he ever had on the streets. He had come here full of hope, believing in the goodness of people. Now, those hopes lay shattered at his feet, as cold and hard as the coins mocking him from the floor. Little did Jayden know that this moment of utter humiliation was just the beginning. The medallion that had drawn Rothschild's attention, the flicker of recognition in the millionaire's eyes, these were the first threads of a mystery that would soon unravel, connecting Jayden's past to Rothschild in ways neither of them could have imagined. As Jayden stood there, fighting back tears and struggling with his decision, the wheels of fate had already been set in motion, leading towards revelations that would shake both their worlds to the core. The opulent room fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the faint tinkling of coins settling on the polished marble floor. Jayden stood frozen, his face burning with shame as he stared at the scattered change at his feet. The weight of dozens of eyes bore down on him, a mixture of pity, disgust, and morbid curiosity etched on the faces of New York's elite. Alexander Rothschild's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Well, boy, what are you waiting for? Pick them up." Jayden's hands trembled at his sides, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Pride warred with desperation as he thought of his ailing grandmother, Lucy, waiting for him in their alley. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to turn and run, to escape this nightmare of humiliation. But the image of Lucy's gaunt face and racking cough steeled his resolve. Taking a deep breath, Jayden slowly knelt down. He could hear the rustle of expensive fabrics as the party guests shifted uncomfortably, their champagne flutes tinkling nervously in their hands. As his fingers closed around the first coin, a single tear escaped, trailing down his cheek and splashing onto the floor. "That's it," Rothschild sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Show us all what you're really made of." As Jayden moved from coin to coin, he became acutely aware of every detail of his surroundings. The overpowering scent of perfume and cologne, the muted whispers and barely suppressed giggles, the harsh glare of the chandelier lights reflecting off the coins, momentarily blinding him as he reached for each one. Suddenly, a woman's voice rang out, thick with alcohol and misplaced amusement. "Oh, Alexander, you're too much. This is better entertainment than that dreadful charity auction." Her words were met with a smattering of nervous laughter, quickly hushed as Rothschild shot a warning glance around the room. But for Jayden, it was as if a dam had burst. Hot, angry tears now flowed freely down his face, splashing onto his hands as he scrambled to gather the remaining coins. As he reached for the last one, a shiny quarter that had rolled up against an expensive leather shoe, Jayden felt a hand roughly grab his shoulder. "That's enough of a show, I think," Rothschild said, his voice cold and dismissive. He yanked Jayden to his feet, causing the boy to drop several of the coins he'd just collected. They clattered to the floor, the sound echoing accusingly in the now silent room. Rothschild's face was a mask of contempt as he looked Jayden up and down. "Let this be a lesson to you, boy. The world isn't interested in your sob stories or your misplaced sense of virtue. You want to survive? Learn to take what you can get and be grateful for it." Jayden stood there, coins clutched tightly in his fist, feeling smaller and more insignificant than he ever had in his life. The medallion around his neck, usually a source of comfort, now felt like it was choking him. I just wanted to do the right thing," Jayden managed to choke out, his voice barely above a whisper. Rothschild's laugh was harsh and humorless. "The right thing? In my world, kid, the right thing is whatever benefits you the most. Remember that." With a dismissive wave of his hand, Rothschild turned to his assistant. "See that this individual is escorted out, and make sure security knows not to let him in again." As the assistant moved to lead Jayden away, he caught sight of himself in one of the room's many mirrors. His reflection was a stark contrast to the glittering opulence around him. A small, bedraggled figure with red-rimmed eyes and tear-stained cheeks, clothes hanging loosely on his thin frame. But there was something else in that reflection, something that made Jayden straighten his shoulders ever so slightly. A glimmer of defiance in his eyes, a set to his jaw that spoke of a strength he didn't even know he possessed. As they reached the door, Jayden turned back one last time. His eyes met Rothschild's, and for a moment, something passed between them. A challenge, perhaps, or a promise of things to come. Then the moment was gone, and Jayden was being led through the winding corridors of the building, past curious onlookers and whispered conversations. The cool night air hit Jayden like a slap as he was unceremoniously deposited on the sidewalk outside. The sounds of the city car horns, distant sirens, the ever-present hum of millions of lives intersecting, seemed muted and far away. For a long moment, Jayden stood there, the handful of coins burning in his palm like a brand of shame. Then, with a sudden, decisive movement, he walked to the nearest storm drain and opened his hand, watching as the coins slipped through his fingers and disappeared into the darkness below. As he turned to begin the long walk back to Lucy, Jayden's hand unconsciously went to the medallion around his neck. He didn't notice the limousine that pulled up behind him, or the tinted window that rolled down just enough for Alexander Rothschild to watch him disappear into the New York night. What Jayden couldn't have known was that his act of returning the wallet had set in motion a chain of events that would unravel long-buried secrets and shake the foundations of Rothschild's carefully constructed world. The medallion that had caught Rothschild's eye was more than just a family heirloom. It was a key to a past that the powerful man had thought long buried. As Jayden walked away, his steps heavy with humiliation but his spirit unbroken, the stage was set for revelations that would change both their lives forever. The story of the street boy and the millionaire was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The New York City night engulfed Jayden as he trudged back towards the alley he called home. The bright lights of the city seemed to mock him now, reminders of a world that had just rejected him so cruelly. His feet felt heavy, each step a monumental effort as the weight of his humiliation threatened to crush him. As he walked, Jayden's hand instinctively went to the medallion around his neck, seeking comfort in its familiar contours. It was the only thing he had left of his mother, Sarah, a tangible link to a past he barely remembered. The cool metal against his skin grounded him, reminding him of who he was and where he came from. Lost in thought, Jayden didn't notice the sleek black car that had been following him at a discreet distance since he left the charity event. Inside, Alexander Rothschild sat in contemplative silence, his eyes never leaving the small figure making its way through the bustling streets. As Jayden neared the alley where Lucy waited, he took a deep breath, steeling himself. How could he face his grandmother after failing so spectacularly? The thought of disappointing her was almost more than he could bear. "Jayden, is that you, my boy?" Lucy's voice, weak but filled with love, called out from the shadows. Swallowing hard, Jayden stepped into their makeshift home. "Yeah, Grandma, it's me," he replied, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. Lucy's face, illuminated by the dim light of a nearby street lamp, creased with concern as she took in Jayden's disheveled appearance and red-rimmed eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, what happened?" Unable to hold back any longer, Jayden crumpled to his knees beside her, burying his face in her lap as sobs racked his small frame. Through his tears, he recounted the events of the evening, the initial hope, the crushing disappointment, and the ultimate humiliation. Lucy listened in silence, her gnarled hands gently stroking Jayden's hair. When he finished, she lifted his chin, her eyes filled with a fierce love. "Jayden, listen to me. What that man did was cruel and wrong. But it doesn't define you. Your actions, Your heart, that's what matters." As Lucy spoke, her fingers absently traced the outline of the medallion hanging around Jayden's neck. Suddenly, she froze, her eyes widening in shock. "Jayden," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where did you say this man's charity event was?" Confused by the abrupt change of subject, Jayden described the lavish high-rise. Lucy's face paled, and she clutched the medallion tightly. "Grandma, what's wrong?" Jayden asked, alarm creeping into his voice. Lucy seemed to be fighting an internal battle. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, "Jayden, there's something I need to tell you about your mother and about that medallion." But before Lucy could continue, a violent coughing fit overtook her. Jayden watched helplessly as his grandmother struggled for breath, her frail body shaking with each cough. As Lucy's coughing subsided, leaving her weak and gasping, Jayden made a decision. "We need to get you to a hospital, Grandma. I don't care how, but we're going." Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed in the alley. Jayden tensed, ready to protect his grandmother from any threat. But as the figure stepped into the light, Jayden's jaw dropped in shock. It was Alexander Rothschild. The millionaire stood there, looking strangely out of place in the dingy alley. His eyes darted between Jayden and Lucy, an unreadable expression on his face. "You," Jayden said, his voice a mixture of anger and disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Rothschild ignored him, his gaze fixed on Lucy. "It can't be," he murmured almost to himself. "After all these years." Lucy stared back at Rothschild, her face a mask of conflicting emotions, fear, anger, and something else Jayden couldn't quite identify. "Alexander," Lucy said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "You shouldn't be here." Jayden looked between his grandmother and the millionaire, confusion written all over his face. "Grandma, do you know him?" Before Lucy could respond, Rothschild's eyes locked onto the medallion around Jayden's neck. In 3 quick strides, he crossed the alley and grabbed it, yanking Jayden forward. "Where did you get this?" Rothschild demanded, his voice shaking with an emotion Jayden couldn't identify. "Answer me, boy." Jayden struggled against Rothschild's grip. "Let go. It was my mother's." At those words, Rothschild released the medallion as if it had burned him. He staggered back, his face ashen. "Your mother's," he repeated, his voice barely audible. "Sarah's." Lucy struggled to her feet, placing herself between Jayden and Rothschild. "That's enough, Alexander. You need to leave. Now." But Rothschild seemed rooted to the spot, his eyes never leaving Jayden's face. "It's impossible," he muttered. "And yet, the resemblance." Jayden's head was spinning. What was going on? How did his grandmother know this man? And why was Rothschild looking at him like that? Suddenly, Lucy swayed on her feet, her strength giving out. As Jayden rushed to support her, Rothschild snapped out of his daze. "She needs medical attention," he said, his voice regaining its authoritative tone. "My car is just around the corner. I'm taking you both to the hospital." Jayden opened his mouth to protest, but Lucy's rasping breath made him hesitate. As much as he hated the idea of accepting help from this man, his grandmother's health came first. With a reluctant nod, Jayden helped Lucy to her feet. As they made their way out of the alley, following Rothschild to his waiting car, Jayden couldn't shake the feeling that his world was about to change forever. The medallion hung heavy around his neck, its secrets still untold. As the car pulled away from the curb, whisking them towards an uncertain future, Jayden couldn't help but wonder, what other surprises did this night have in store? And how would the answers to these mounting questions reshape everything he thought he knew about himself and his family? The sleek black car glided through the neon-lit streets of New York City, its luxurious interior a stark contrast to the world Jayden had known. He sat in the back seat, cradling his grandmother Lucy's frail form, while Alexander Rothschild occupied the front passenger seat, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The tension in the car was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Jayden's mind raced with questions. But Lucy's labored breathing kept him silent, fear for her health overriding his curiosity. As they pulled up to the emergency entrance of New York Presbyterian Hospital, Rothschild sprang into action. With a few curt words and the flash of a platinum credit card, Lucy was whisked away by a team of doctors and nurses, leaving Jayden standing in the sterile hallway, feeling lost and overwhelmed. "She's in good hands now," Rothschild said, his voice softer than Jayden had ever heard it. "Come, there's a private waiting room where we can talk." Jayden followed, wary but without much choice. As they settled into the plush chairs of a secluded room, Rothschild's eyes once again fixed on the medallion around Jayden's neck. "That medallion," Rothschild began, his voice tight with emotion. "I gave it to your mother on her 16th birthday." Jayden's hand flew to the medallion, clutching it protectively. You knew my mother?" Rothschild's laugh was hollow, tinged with bitterness. "Knew her? I raised her. Sarah was my daughter." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Jayden struggled to process this information. But that would mean..." "Yes," Rothschild confirmed, his eyes never leaving Jayden's face. "If what I suspect is true, I'm your grandfather." As Jayden sat in stunned silence, Rothschild's gaze became distant, lost in memories. "It was over 20 years ago," he began, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. The scene shifted, the sterile hospital walls fading away to be replaced by the opulent interior of a Rothschild mansion. A younger Alexander Rothschild stood in his study, facing a beautiful young woman with fiery determination in her eyes. "Sarah, be reasonable," the younger Rothschild pleaded. "You're throwing away your future for some penniless artist." "His name is Michael," Sarah shot back, her hand protectively covering her still flat stomach. "And I love him. Why can't you understand that?" "Love," Rothschild scoffed. "Love won't pay the bills or provide for a child. You're 18, for God's sake. You have your whole life ahead of you." Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. "A life you've planned out for me. Well, I'm making my own choices now. Michael and I are leaving, and we're keeping this baby. If you walk out that door," Rothschild warned, his voice cold, "don't expect to come back. You'll be cut off, do you understand? No money, no support. Nothing." For a moment, Sarah hesitated, her hand going to the medallion around her neck. Then, with a look of resolve, she straightened her shoulders. "Goodbye, Father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As the door closed behind her, Rothschild collapsed into his chair, head in his hands. Back in the hospital waiting room, Jayden stared at Rothschild in disbelief. You threw her out? Your own daughter." Rothschild's face was a mask of regret. "I was a different man then, proud, stubborn. I thought she'd come back, that she'd realize she was making a mistake." He laughed bitterly. "Instead, I made the biggest mistake of my life." "What happened to her?" Jayden asked, his voice small. "To my mother and my father?" Rothschild sighed heavily. "I don't know. After Sarah left, I was too proud to reach out. Years passed. I hired private investigators, but it was like they'd vanished. Until tonight, when I saw that medallion around your neck." Jayden's mind was reeling. He had always wondered about his parents, but Lucy had been tight-lipped, saying only that they had died when he was very young. Now, faced with this flood of information, he felt lost. "But why?" Jayden asked, his voice cracking. "Why did you treat me like that earlier? If you suspected who I was..." Shame flashed across Rothschild's face. "I didn't know. Not at first. When I saw the medallion, I panicked. I lashed out. It's no excuse, I know." Before Jayden could respond, a doctor entered the room. "Mr. Rothschild? We have some news about Lucy's condition." As they stood to follow the doctor, Rothschild placed a hesitant hand on Jayden's shoulder. "I know I have no right to ask this, but will you give me a chance to make things right?" Jayden looked up at the man who had humiliated him just hours ago, the man who claimed to be his grandfather. His emotions were a turbulent mix of anger, confusion, and a desperate longing for family he'd never known he had. I don't know, Jayden said honestly, but right now my grandmother needs me. She's the only family I've ever known. Rothschild nodded, understanding and a hint of hope in his eyes. As they walked towards Lucy's room, Jayden couldn't help but feel that his life had irrevocably changed. The medallion around his neck, once a simple keepsake, now felt like a key unlocking a past he never knew existed. What other secrets did Lucy hold? And how would these revelations change his relationship with the woman who had raised him? As they approached Lucy's room, Jayden steeled himself for whatever news awaited them, knowing that this was just the beginning of a journey that would unravel the very fabric of his identity. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment filled the air as Jayden sat by Lucy's hospital bed, his hand gently clasping hers. The stark white walls and antiseptic smell were a far cry from their usual surroundings, but at least here, Lucy was getting the care she desperately needed. Alexander Rothschild stood awkwardly by the door, his usual commanding presence diminished in this unfamiliar territory. The doctor had informed them that Lucy was stable but weak, her years of neglect and poor living conditions having taken a severe toll on her health. As Lucy slept, Jayden's mind whirled with the revelations of the past few hours. He looked up at Rothschild, studying the man who claimed to be his grandfather. The resemblance was there, now that he knew to look for it. The same set of the jaw, the same piercing eyes. Why didn't she ever tell me? Jayden wondered aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Rothschild moved closer, pulling up a chair on the other side of Lucy's bed. I suspect she was trying to protect you, he said softly, and perhaps to protect herself from the past. Jayden's hand unconsciously went to the medallion around his neck. But why? What happened to my parents? There's so much I don't understand. Rothschild's face clouded with a mixture of guilt and determination. I intend to find out, he said, his voice regaining some of its usual authority. I've already set my best private investigators on the case. We'll uncover the truth, Jayden. I promise you that. As if on cue, Rothschild's phone buzzed. He excused himself, stepping out into the hallway to take the call. Jayden watched him go, a conflicting mess of emotions churning inside him. When Rothschild returned, there was a new energy in his step. That was my head of security, he explained. They've found something. An old apartment lease in your mother's name, from about 13 years ago. Jayden's heart leapt. That's around the time I was born. Rothschild nodded. Exactly. It's not much, but it's a start. I'm gonna check it out personally. He hesitated, then added, Would you like to come with me? Jayden glanced at Lucy's sleeping form, torn between his desire for answers and his need to stay with the only family he'd ever known. As if sensing his dilemma, Lucy's eyes fluttered open. Go, she whispered, her voice weak but clear. Find your truth, my boy. I'll be here when you get back. With a squeeze of Lucy's hand and a promise to return soon, Jayden found himself following Rothschild out of the hospital and into the New York night. The drive to the old apartment was tense, filled with unasked questions and unspoken regrets. As they pulled up to a rundown building in a less-than-savory part of town, Jayden couldn't help but wonder if this was where he had spent his earliest years. Stay close, Rothschild instructed as they made their way inside. The building was a far cry from the luxurious high-rises Rothschild was used to, but he navigated the creaky stairs with determined steps. At apartment 3B, they paused. Rothschild produced a key he'd obtained from the building manager, and with a deep breath, he opened the door. The apartment was small and dusty, clearly uninhabited for years. But as they stepped inside, it was as if ghosts of the past sprung to life. A faded mural on one wall depicted a whimsical forest scene, the artist's talent evident even through years of neglect. Sarah always loved to paint, Rothschild murmured, his fingers tracing the outline of a painted tree. Jayden moved through the space in a daze, trying to imagine his parents living here, imagining himself as a baby in this very room. In a corner, he spotted something that made his heart skip a beat. A small box, partially hidden behind a radiator. With trembling hands, Jayden pulled out the box and opened it. Inside were a handful of photographs, a few letters, and a small, leather-bound journal. "Look," Jayden breathed, holding up a photo. In it, a young woman with Jayden's eyes smiled at the camera, her arms wrapped around a handsome man with an artist's paint-spattered hands. Between them, barely visible, was the swell of the woman's pregnant belly. Rothschild took the photo, his hands shaking. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And that must be Michael, your father." As they pored over the contents of the box, a story began to emerge. The journal entries spoke of love and hardship, of dreams deferred but hope undimmed. But the final entries were troubling, hinting at fear and a need to run. Someone was after them, Jayden realized, his voice filled with dread. But who? And why? Rothschild's face had turned grim. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I intend to find out. Whatever happened to your parents, Jayden, I swear to you, we'll uncover the truth." As they prepared to leave, Jayden tucked the box of memories safely under his arm. But something caught his eye, a loose floorboard, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Kneeling down, Jayden pried it up, revealing a small hidden compartment. Inside was a single envelope, addressed simply, "To our son." With heart pounding, Jayden opened it. Inside was a letter, the paper yellowed with age but the words still clear. "My darling boy, if you're reading this, then something has happened to your father and me. Know that we love you more than life itself. The world can be a dangerous place, full of secrets and hidden agendas. Trust Lucy. She knows the truth and will protect you. And remember, the medallion is more than just a family heirloom. It's a key to." The letter ended abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted. Jayden looked up at Rothschild, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. "A key?" Rothschild mused, his brow furrowed. "But to what?" As they left the apartment, more questions swirling in their minds than answers. Neither Jayden nor Rothschild noticed the dark figure watching them from across the street. A figure that melted into the shadows as soon as they drove away, already reaching for a phone to make a call. The search for truth had only just begun, and with each revelation, the stakes seemed to grow higher. What secrets did the medallion hold? What danger had Sarah and Michael fled from? And how did it all connect to Jayden's present and future? As they drove back to the hospital, Jayden clutched the box of memories to his chest, the weight of his newly discovered past pressing down on him. One thing was clear, and nothing would ever be the same again. The hospital room was bathed in the soft glow of early morning light as Jayden sat by Lucy's bedside, the box of memories from his parents' old apartment clutched tightly in his lap. Alexander Rothschild paced near the window, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in hushed, urgent tones to his team of investigators. Lucy stirred, her eyes fluttering open to focus on Jayden. A weak smile crossed her face, but it faded as she noticed the box and the troubled expression on her grandson's face. "You found something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jayden nodded, his emotions a turbulent mix of excitement, confusion, and a hint of betrayal. "Why didn't you ever tell me, Grandma? About my parents, about him?" He gestured towards Rothschild, who had ended his call and was now watching the exchange with a guarded expression. Lucy sighed, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh, my sweet boy, I wanted to protect you. The truth, it's complicated and dangerous." "Dangerous?" Rothschild interjected, moving closer to the bed. "Lucy, what do you know? What were Sarah and Michael running from?" Lucy's gaze hardened as she looked at Rothschild. "You have no right to ask that, Alexander. Not after what you did." "What I did?" Rothschild's voice rose, a mix of indignation and desperation. "I've spent years searching for her, for them. If you knew something, why didn't you come to me?" "Because you drove them away." Lucy shot back, her frail body shaking with emotion. "Your pride, your stubbornness, it cost Sarah everything." Jayden looked between his grandmother and the man who claimed to be his grandfather, feeling like a spectator in his own life story. Please, he pleaded. I need to know the truth, all of it. Lucy closed her eyes, seeming to gather her strength. When she opened them again, there was a resolve in her gaze that Jayden had never seen before. It started about a year after Sarah left, she began. She and Michael were struggling, but happy. They had you, Jayden, and their love for each other and for you was stronger than any hardship. Lucy's voice took on a storyteller's cadence as she continued, transporting them back in time. Sarah sat at an easel, paintbrush in hand, while baby Jayden cooed in a makeshift playpen nearby. Michael burst through the door of their tiny apartment, his face alight with excitement. I sold a painting, he exclaimed, sweeping Sarah into his arms. A real gallery, Sarah. They want to feature my work. Sarah's laugh was pure joy. Oh, Michael, that's wonderful. I knew you could do it. As they celebrated, neither noticed the shadow that passed by their window, nor the click of a camera shutter. Back in the hospital room, Lucy's voice grew somber. That's when it all started to unravel. Michael's sudden success attracted attention. The wrong kind of attention. Rothschild leaned forward, his brow furrowed. What do you mean, Lucy? Who was after them? Lucy shot him a look that was part anger, part pity. You really don't know, do you, Alexander? Your company, Rothschild Enterprises, it's not just real estate, is it? Rothschild's face paled. What are you talking about? The art world is a perfect cover for less savory business dealings, Lucy continued. Money laundering, smuggling. Sarah discovered something, didn't she? Something about your company's true nature. Rothschild staggered back as if he'd been struck. That's impossible. I would have known. Would you? Lucy challenged. Or were you too focused on your empire to see what was happening right under your nose? Jayden's head was spinning. But what does this have to do with my parents? With me? Lucy reached out, her hand closing around the medallion that hung from Jayden's neck. This isn't just a family heirloom, Jayden. It's a key, just like your mother's letter said. A key to evidence that could bring down an entire criminal network. The room fell silent as the weight of this revelation settled over them. Jayden's fingers traced the intricate design of the medallion, seeing it with new eyes. Suddenly, Rothschild's phone rang, shattering the tense silence. His face grew grave as he listened to the caller. I understand. Lock down the building. I'm on my way. As he ended the call, he turned to Jayden and Lucy, his expression a mix of fear and determination. That was security. There's been a breach at my office. Someone's after the company files. Jayden stood, his heart racing. We have to go. If what Grandma says is true, then the answers we need are there. Lucy grabbed Jayden's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Be careful, my boy. The truth you're seeking, it comes with a heavy price. As Jayden and Rothschild prepared to leave, a nurse entered the room. Excuse me, there's a police officer here. He says he needs to speak with Jayden urgently. Jayden and Rothschild exchanged worried glances. Was this related to the break-in? Or was something more sinister at play? As a tall, stern-looking officer entered the room, Jayden felt the weight of the medallion against his chest. Whatever came next, he knew that the key to unraveling the mystery of his past and securing his future hung quite literally around his neck. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of everything Jayden thought he knew about his family, his identity, and the dangerous world he had unwittingly been born into. The sleek elevator ascended Rothschild Tower, its smooth ride belying the tension that filled the small space. Jayden stood between Alexander Rothschild and Detective Harrington, his hand unconsciously clutching the medallion around his neck. The weight of the small key Lucy had given him seemed to burn in his pocket. As the elevator chimed, signaling their arrival at the top floor, Rothschild turned to Jayden, his face a mask of concern and determination. Whatever happens in there, Jayden, remember your family. I've made mistakes, but I want to make things right. Jayden nodded, unsure how to respond to this sudden display of familial loyalty from a man who, just days ago, had humiliated him in front of New York's elite. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a scene of controlled chaos. Security personnel swarmed the executive floor, their faces tense as they coordinated their efforts via earpieces. At the center of it all, a woman with sharp features and a crisp suit strode towards them. "Mr. Rothschild," she said, her voice clipped. "The intruder is contained in your office. They're demanding to speak with you." And the boy, her eyes flickered to Jayden. Rothschild's jaw tightened. "Thank you, Ms. Reeves. We'll handle it from here." As they approached the office, Detective Harrington placed a hand on Jayden's shoulder. "You don't have to do this, kid. We can handle it." But Jayden shook his head, a steely resolve in his eyes. "No, I need to know the truth. About my parents, about everything." With a deep breath, Rothschild pushed open the door to his office. Inside, a figure dressed in black stood by the window, their back to the door. As they turned, Jayden's breath caught in his throat. The intruder was a woman, probably in her late 30s. But it was her eyes that struck Jayden. They were eerily similar to his own. "Hello, Alexander," the woman said, her voice a mixture of anger and something else. "Regret? It's been a long time." Rothschild stumbled back, his face pale. "Sarah? But how? We thought you were dead." Sarah finished, a bitter smile on her face. "Not quite, though there were times I wished I was." Jayden's mind reeled. This woman, this stranger, was his mother? The one he'd believed dead for all these years? "Mom!" he whispered, his voice cracking. Sarah's eyes softened as they landed on Jayden. "Oh, Jayden, my brave, beautiful boy. I'm so sorry. For everything." Before Jayden could respond, Detective Harrington stepped forward, his hand on his holstered gun. "Sarah Rothschild? You're under arrest for dash." "No!" Rothschild interrupted. "Please, detective, let's hear her out." Sarah nodded gratefully at her father before turning back to Jayden. "I know you must have so many questions. Why we left you, why we never came back. The truth is, we never wanted to leave you, but we had no choice." She moved to Rothschild's desk, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The art smuggling ring, it went deeper than anyone knew. Government officials, powerful businessmen, even law enforcement. Her eyes flickered to Detective Harrington. "We couldn't trust anyone." As she spoke, documents began to appear on the large screen behind the desk. Financial records, coded messages, photographs, a web of corruption laid bare. "The medallion," Sarah continued. "It's not just a key, it's part of an encryption. Without it, all of this," she gestured to the screen, "is just gibberish." Jayden's hand went to the medallion, understanding dawning. "That's why you left it with me, to keep it safe." Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. We thought we'd come back for you, that we'd finish this and then be a family again. But they were always one step ahead." Rothschild had been silent, his eyes glued to the screen. "All of this, under my nose? How could I not have known?" "Because you didn't want to know, Dad," Sarah said softly. "You were too focused on building your empire to see what was happening within it." The room fell silent as the weight of these revelations settled over them. Jayden's mind was spinning, trying to reconcile the years of longing for his parents with the woman standing before him now. Detective Harrington cleared his throat. "This is a lot to process. But Sarah, you're still wanted for questioning. And Mr. Rothschild, your company will need to answer for this." Jayden looked between his newfound mother and grandfather, the impossible choice laid out before him. Use the medallion to decrypt the files, exposing the full extent of the corruption but potentially destroying Rothschild Enterprises in the process. Or protect the company, and with it, the livelihoods of thousands at the cost of justice and the truth. As all eyes turned to him, Jayden felt the weight of the medallion around his neck, the key burning in his pocket. In that moment, he realized that sometimes there are no easy answers, no clear-cut right or wrong. Sometimes, the hardest choices are the ones that force us to weigh our personal desires against the greater good. With a deep breath, Jayden stepped forward, ready to make a decision that would alter not just his life, but the lives of everyone in that room and beyond. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The tension in Alexander Rothschild's office was palpable as all eyes focused on Jayden. The young boy stood at the center of a storm he never asked to be part of, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. Jayden's hand trembled as he reached for the medallion around his neck. He looked at Sarah, the mother he'd just met, then at Alexander Rothschild, the grandfather he was still getting to know. Finally, his eyes settled on Detective Harrington, who watched him with a mix of sympathy and professional interest. Taking a deep breath, Jayden spoke, his voice surprisingly steady. I think the truth needs to come out. All of it." Sarah's eyes widened. "Jayden, are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back." Jayden nodded, a maturity beyond his years evident in his eyes. "I've lived my whole life not knowing who I am or where I came from. I can't let others suffer because of secrets and lies." With trembling fingers, Jayden removed the medallion and handed it to Sarah. She took it reverently, then retrieved a small device from her pocket. As she connected the medallion to the device, the large screen behind Rothschild's desk came to life, a cascade of decrypted files flooding the display. Detective Harrington stepped forward, his eyes scanning the information. This is bigger than we ever imagined. Government officials, judges, even some of my own colleagues." Alexander Rothschild sank into his chair, his face ashen. "I built this company from the ground up. How could I not have seen this happening right under my nose?" Sarah placed a comforting hand on her father's shoulder. "You saw what you wanted to see, Dad, but now we have a chance to make it right." As the gravity of the situation settled over the room, Jayden's voice cut through the silence. "What happens now? To all of us?" Detective Harrington sighed, rubbing his forehead. "It's going to be a long and complicated process. Mr. Rothschild, your company will be under investigation. Sarah, you'll need to testify, but given the circumstances, we can arrange for witness protection." "And me?" Jayden asked, his voice small. Sarah knelt in front of her son, tears in her eyes. "Oh, Jayden, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you consider giving me a chance to be your mother again?" Jayden's emotions warred within him, years of longing battling with the pain of abandonment. But as he looked into Sarah's eyes, he saw regret, love, and hope. I think I'd like that," he said softly. "But what about Grandma Lucy? She's the one who's been there for me all these years." Alexander Rothschild stood, a new resolve in his bearing. "We'll take care of Lucy, Jayden, all of us together. It's time I started acting like a real father and grandfather." As the first rays of dawn peeked through the office windows, casting a golden glow over the city, Jayden felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with legal battles, public scrutiny, and the difficult process of rebuilding relationships. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he truly belonged somewhere. Months passed, and the Rothschild case dominated headlines. Alexander Rothschild, in a move that shocked many, cooperated fully with the authorities, working to dismantle the corrupt elements of his company while striving to protect the jobs of innocent employees. Sarah's testimony was crucial in bringing down the art smuggling ring and the corrupt officials involved. Though she faced legal consequences for her past actions, her cooperation and the circumstances of her involvement led to a lenient sentence. Lucy, now recovered and living comfortably thanks to Alexander's support, became the bridge between Jayden's past and his new future. Her unwavering love helped smooth the transition as Jayden got to know his mother and grandfather. 1 year after that fateful night in Rothschild Tower, Jayden stood on the balcony of a modest but comfortable apartment. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of his unusual family, Sarah and Lucy chatting in the kitchen, Alexander's deep laugh mixing with the clatter of dishes. As he looked out over the city, the medallion once again hanging around his neck, Jayden reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had lost the life he knew, but gained the family he had always longed for. The path hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but he faced them with a strength he never knew he possessed. In that moment, Jayden realized that sometimes the happy endings in real life aren't about everything being perfect. They're about finding peace with the imperfections, about choosing to love and forgive, and about the courage to face the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. As Sarah called him in for dinner, Jayden smiled. His story, their story, was far from over. But this new chapter, filled with love, truth, and second chances, was off to a promising start. The medallion caught the last rays of the setting sun, glinting as if to remind Jayden that sometimes, the key to our future lies in confronting our past. With one last look at the city skyline, Jayden turned and walked inside, ready to embrace whatever adventures lay ahead with his newfound family by his side. So, if you haven't subscribed yet, click the subscribe button below and join our community. Based on your interests, we've picked this story for you that's showing on your screen right now. Click to watch it now. We're sure you'll love it. See you next time.